2026 arrived quietly, but for Lee Jun-ho and Yoona, it didn't feel ordinary at all. To longtime fans, something about this year felt heavier, more meaningful, as if the pieces of two long journeys were finally aligning in ways that couldn't be ignored anymore. It wasn't about loud announcements or dramatic headlines. It was about timing, growth, and the quiet weight of legacy. Lee Jun-ho entered 2026 standing at a rare crossroads. After years of relentless dedication, critically acclaimed performances, and a reputation built on discipline and humility, he had reached a point where every decision mattered. He was no longer just choosing roles, he was shaping how he would be remembered. Fans noticed the shift immediately. His interviews were more reflective. His words carried intention. He spoke less about success and more about meaning. Yoona, on the other hand, stepped into 2026 with a calm confidence that only comes from longevity. Having grown from a beloved idol into a respected actress, she had already proven her versatility. Yet this year felt different for her too. There was a sense of closure behind her smile and anticipation ahead. Projects she chose weren't about exposure anymore. They were about resonance, about stories that stayed with people long after the screen went dark. What fans couldn't help noticing was how often their paths seemed to echo each other's. No official collaboration was announced. No public confirmation was made. Yet their names began appearing in the same conversations again. Industry events, award seasons, subtle overlaps in schedules. A similar tone in interviews when speaking about love, life, and future plans. It wasn't coincidence, it felt like alignment. For fans who had followed both of them for years, this wasn't unfamiliar. Lee Jun-ho and Yoona had always shared a quiet understanding. Even in the past, their interactions were never flashy. They were subtle, respectful, grounded. And now, in 2026, that same quiet energy was resurfacing, only deeper, more mature, and far more intentional. Social media began picking up on the smallest details. A line from Jun-ho's interview about waiting for the right season. A comment Yoona made about choosing what truly lasts. Fans connected the dots, not out of fantasy, but out of pattern recognition built over years of watching both artists grow. But this story was never just about romance. It was about timing. For years, Lee Jun-ho and Yoona had been moving forward, sometimes in parallel, sometimes apart, each focused on building something solid. Careers, reputations, inner strength. And now, in 2026, both stood at a point where the question wasn't what's next, but what truly matters. Those close to the industry whispered that this year felt different because both stars were no longer rushing. They were choosing, carefully, intentionally, and when two people reach that stage at the same time, it creates a kind of gravity that's hard to ignore. Fans began calling 2026 their legacy year. Not because of awards or numbers, but because legacy is about what remains when the noise fades. It's about the stories you tell, the people you stand beside, and the values you carry forward. As the year unfolded, every public appearance, every carefully worded answer, every moment of silence seemed to carry more meaning. And while neither Lee Jun-ho nor Yoona confirmed anything outright, the message felt clear. This chapter was being written with care. Because love, when paired with timing, doesn't rush. And legacy is built when you finally know who you are and what you're willing to protect. As the months of 2026 unfolded, the quiet attention around Lee Jun-ho and Yoona only grew stronger. It wasn't driven by rumors or forced narratives, but by something far more compelling: consistency. Fans began noticing that whenever one of them spoke about personal growth, the other echoed similar sentiments within weeks. Different interviews, different locations, yet the same emotional language. Words like stability, gratitude, patience, and purpose appeared again and again. Lee Jun-ho, in particular, seemed more introspective than ever. In interviews, he spoke about how success no longer felt complete unless it was balanced with peace. He mentioned valuing people who had stayed through every season of his life, not just the successful ones. To many fans, these weren't casual remarks. They felt like reflections shaped by experience, by lessons learned the hard way, and by an understanding that legacy isn't built alone. Yoona, meanwhile, radiated a quiet assurance that fans had rarely seen before. She smiled easily, spoke gently, and carried herself with a calm strength that suggested contentment rather than ambition. When asked about her future, she didn't speak about chasing bigger stages or louder recognition. Instead, she talked about choosing stories that felt honest, relationships that felt grounding, and moments that felt real. That shift didn't go unnoticed. Fans began revisiting old moments, not out of nostalgia, but to understand the present. Past interviews, award show interactions, shared spaces where their paths had crossed briefly before moving on. Looking back, everything felt like preparation. Like two people growing separately, learning the same lessons until timing finally allowed them to stand on equal ground. Industry insiders added fuel to the conversation, not through confirmation, but through observation. Several mentioned how both Jun-ho and Yoona were known for being deliberate, private, and deeply respectful when it came to personal matters. Neither rushed into decisions. Neither followed trends blindly. When they chose something, they chose it fully. And that's what made 2026 feel different. This wasn't the energy of two people discovering themselves. It was the energy of two people who already knew who they were and were now choosing what deserved space in their lives. Public appearances only deepened the intrigue. At industry events, fans noticed how both seemed more relaxed, more grounded. There were no dramatic moments, no headline screaming scandal. Just a sense of ease. A sense that they were exactly where they needed to be. Social media reactions shifted too. Instead of loud speculation, fans spoke in softer tones. Words like right timing, mature, and meant to be replaced the usual frenzy. Many expressed that even without confirmation, they felt peace watching how both artists were moving through this chapter. It felt respectful. It felt intentional. Behind all the speculation, one truth became clear. This story wasn't about proving anything to the public. It was about alignment. For years, Jun-ho had carried the weight of expectation, idol, actor, performer, leader. In 2026, he seemed to finally set that weight down, choosing balance over pressure. Yoona, having spent most of her life in the spotlight, appeared to have reached a place where she no longer needed to explain herself. She simply lived. And when two people reach that stage at the same time, something powerful happens. Fans began calling it a quiet love story. Not because it was hidden, but because it didn't need noise. There were no dramatic gestures, no forced narratives. Just shared values, mutual respect, and the sense that whatever was happening, whether personal or simply parallel, was being protected with care. As 2026 continued, one thing was undeniable. Both Jun-ho and Yoona were building something lasting. Not just in their careers, but in the way they approached life itself. They were no longer chasing moments, they were creating meaning. And maybe that's why this year feels like their most defining one yet. Because love isn't always about beginnings. Sometimes it's about arriving, finally, at the right place, at the right time, as the right versions of yourselves. As the year moved forward, the conversation around Jun-ho and Yoona slowly shifted from curiosity to contemplation. Fans weren't just asking what was happening anymore, they were asking why it felt so right. And the answer, many believed, lay in how both stars had evolved. Jun-ho had reached a stage where he no longer needed to prove his range or dedication. His choices reflected intention rather than urgency. He spoke openly about rest, about protecting his inner world, and about learning when to say no. For someone who had spent years pushing himself beyond limits, this change felt significant. It was as if he had finally given himself permission to live, not just perform. Yoona mirrored that same energy. Her presence felt lighter, freer. She no longer carried the pressure of expectations placed on her since her teenage years. Instead, she moved with quiet authority, comfortable in her success, grounded in her identity. When she talked about